Question.
Hi, my name is Liska. I have a question about the one-state solution itself, because I mean I never spent a lot of time in 48, so I don't know how the mood there is. So I was just a lot in contact with soldiers, for example, in the West Bank. And do you think there's a realistic chance in 48 of the population in Israel so far that they could live together with Palestinians?
Well, I mean, in fact, I mean, it's kind of weird to say this, but you'll understand what I mean. With everything else, the occupation and the repression and everything, we are living together in a way. Certainly inside Israel. There's certainly not equality. But from the point of view of the level of violence, there is a certain amount of coexistence that exists. You know, inside Israel, where the Palestinians are 20% of the population, half the Palestinian population votes for Zionist parties in elections. Whether it's the Labour Party or Meretz. I mean, Meretz now I think has 2 Palestinian members of the Knesset, or even Shas. Shas is a right-wing religious party in the Netanyahu government that gets quite a few votes, especially from religious Palestinians, especially from the Islamic Palestinians, because it represents religious values. It's not necessarily, you know, so you have that, but you also have the other way around. Today you've got 20,000 Israeli Jews that vote for Arab parties, or what are considered Arab parties, the Communist Party and Balad, the Arab Nationalist Party. Both of those get about 20,000 votes from Jews. So it isn't broken down necessarily just between 2 blocks of populations, certainly. And I think what a one state would do is open up there's all kinds of other connections. There's class connections, there's gender connections, there's political ideologies that span whether you're Jewish or Palestinian, generational, so I think we're going to find, you saw this one, interesting when Oslo happened. I mean, Oslo happened after, 1993, so we're talking about 77, 87, 25 years of occupation, and then on the background of 48 and everything else. Oslo happens in like a jack-in-the-box. All of a sudden, there's all kinds of joint programs that popped out. The Dead Sea was going to become casinos. There's going to be a new airport opened by Eilat. Israelis and Palestinians have 1,000 high-tech projects that are already going, because the Palestinian high-tech sector is fairly well developed. In other words, all of a sudden, what you would assume to have been the hatreds and everything of all those years kind of fell away. There was a whole period of end of 93, 94 into 95 that it was like that. So I think there's an ambivalence here where I think the Palestinians, more than anything else, I mean, I don't want to represent the Palestinians, are almost are pissed off and outraged because they know that Israelis know that they're not really terrorists and that they're not really the enemy. That it's used that way, it's presented that way for Israeli self-interest. But then in fact, the peoples have lived together and do live together, and so I think that basis is there for coexistence. I would argue maybe that the English and the Irish hate each other more than the Israelis and Palestinians. I think the Poles hate the Russians and the Jews more than the Israelis and Palestinians. The Israeli-Palestinian thing is sort of new in a way. It's 100 years old, and it doesn't have the same roots and the scale of violence that, let's say, European hatreds. But, on the other hand, you look at the young generation today. I don't know how many young French people, want to go attack Germany. There's a good and bad point to this. We want to remember. We should remember. That's why we have museums. We want to remember the past and the lessons. But what happens is young people forget very fast. It's amazing how quick it goes. So, everything we're doing now, in another generation would be ancient history. I was in South Africa a couple of years ago, and I met a lot of anti-apartheid activists. And they have a whole project in South Africa of teaching the young generation about apartheid. They've forgotten. They don't know Soweto. They certainly don't know the passbook laws of Sharpsville. Mandela, for the young generation of South Africans, is a distant figure like Gandhi. They've really gone on. They've moved on, and they have their own concerns. And there's obviously issues in South Africa. But that whole period it's like in a generation. It's ancient history. I think, if you look here, I don't know how much World War II is still, if you go out and ask people, I don't know, if you ask young Dutch people, what's D-Day? Or where's Normandy? I don't know how many would know. So that's a good thing in this sense that we're talking about. Of course, we want to try to keep memories going and identities going, and that's why we have museums and things like that. But I think, with a level playing field, we would move on very quickly.
I'm sorry, I disagree with him. This is now, first of all, when it comes to youngs are forget, which is in one part he say it's positive and negative. First of all, you can't compare the youngs in South Africa and the youngs of Palestinians, because I notice now the young Palestinians who are more, I don't want to say more committed, but because they have other chances to use all these new methods, how to really to speak about Palestine. Otherwise, why until now we are still really talking about this issue? If you mean it's really young or
when the conflict ends.
Yeah, but I feel now, when I met young Palestinians educated, then I'm silent. I have nothing to say, They have their new methods of fighting, Okay, since always the Palestinians are really invest a lot with education, etc. But not everybody have, the possibility also to send their sons or daughters to study outside. But it was existed. This is since long time ago. The second issue, according to the question of the nice lady, the Palestinians in 48, who are the minority, we can call them, or the indigenous, in fact, they were left alone. You can imagine since the Nakba, 1948, until 67. After 67, there were the slang. And I will give you example. Even now, it's all occupied. But I will give you two examples. Darim Tatour, a young Palestinian, she wrote some poetry. She was in prison 3 years. You know why? Because of one poetry she published in Facebook talking about the army. And now you know where it's forbidden to live in her village or city. Now she lives in a colony. I met her before 10 days in France. She said it's forbidden. Can you imagine? She wear the veil and she live in a colony. It's forbidden for her to return back to her village of origin. The other one, Amir Makhul, we used to work together in the UN. He have an organization, and we collaborate a lot during the conference against racism in South Africa. Because if I want to speak about the racist state of Israel, I need the actors, the people who are inside. How many laws, my God, Israeli laws, which give, differences than when you are originally Arab, when you are originally Ethiopian, when you are originally from South Sudan, when you are originally Muslim, when you are Druze, when you are, a state who divided the people, what you will call it? Just a racist state. And the last law, which was voted in the Knesset in July last year, what you will call it? National state. What about non-Jewish? What we will call them? They have to leave the territory. Amir Makhul was in prison 13 years. It's right? 13. You know why? Because he went to Lebanon. So, because in fact, Lebanon, one of the countries, Lebanon, Algeria, Iraq, Syria, etc., the Israelis, they don't have the right to go there. But I know many Europeans who have double nationalities, they go. They have Israeli nationality and French. They apply for visa and then they go for Algeria. Nobody knows that they have the Israeli nationality in Lebanon, I mean. So this is the issue, in fact. The Palestinians were left alone, the Palestinians in 48, until 67, and until now. The Palestinian Authority have no right to support them, by the way. According to Oslo, they don't have the right even to defend them legally. Any organization based in the occupied territory, I mean, they don't, under the Palestinian Authority, they have no right, the lawyers, to defend any Palestinian, I mean Israeli, who is in prison in Israel. They don't have the right. The regulation is terrible. As a lawyer, when I read it, it's terrible. You know, it's like, I'm as a lawyer in Switzerland, I could be mandated to go to defend any prisoner in France. But this is not the case when it comes to Palestinians who are in prisons in Israel. Yeah. So there is many issues, in fact. So I don't blame them. He speak about coexistence. It's not all cases. I know many people still fighting, you know, but it's not easy for them because they hold just the Israeli nationality. Nobody recognizes them. I'm sorry if there is other question.
My name is George. Thank you for talking a little bit about international law. Jeff, please help me understand why you suggest to forget about international law. For instance, if Israel had signed the Geneva Conventions, how can IDF throw white phosphorus on the Gaza and remain unpunished? Thank you.
Well, that's the point. The point is, Israel has signed on the Geneva Conventions, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't constrain them, and it doesn't constrain anybody that's supposed to be enforcing the Geneva Conventions. There's no sanctions. You know, the problem with international law, I mean, it's wonderful. You know, as a matter of fact, Ron, you forgot one person in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Charles Malek, who was a Lebanese diplomat. Yeah, I know. You want to emphasize the Jews. Rene Cassin. But you know, it just simply can't be enforced. Partly because, of course, the instrument of enforcement is the UN Security Council. Well, do I have to go on why that's not going to happen? So in other words, if there's no implementation, what's the point of it all? It's sort of. I mean, I'm not dismissing it. I think it's very important in terms of ideals, but there's no way to enforce it. There's no way to hold countries accountable to it unless you're poor. You know, Charles Taylor got stuck. Milosevic got caught. I mean, you can go after the weaker parties. You know, and in that sense, international law, you might even say, has become an instrument of discipline of the stronger parties of weaker parties. Saddam Hussein, and every time the US or Europe or the stronger parties want to invade or want to sanction or want to arrest someone, they use international law as their way of doing it. But they would never use international law against each other. So that it becomes, in a way, an instrument of enforcement of the strong against the weak. And of course, I think from my point of view, it creates an illusion because people begin to give it more weight than it deserves. I'll give you just one example and then I'll stop. It's happening with the Palestinians. If you look at a lot of young Palestinian intellectuals, if you look at this website, Shabaka, which is young Palestinian academics and intellectuals, you'll see there's a new kind of a talking. People are starting to say, Palestinians are starting to say, we don't care about a political solution. 1 state, 10 states, 2 states, we don't care. And this is now the line of the BDS movement. We want a rights-based approach. That's the new language. Well, there isn't any such animal. There is no rights-based approach. Human rights and international law are not a political program. their guidelines, their values, but they're not a political, they don't tell you what replaces occupation, what kind of society you have, what kind of economy you have, security issue. I mean, every issue isn't covered by international law. Provides a certain framework. But if we're going to put all our, if the Palestinians start to say, forget politics, we're going to invest our hopes in international law, whoa, they're completely giving up, basically, because international law can't deliver for them. And so I think there's I actually sometimes find it a negative thing. Not that we should eliminate international law or human rights, but you can't replace politics. You can't replace it. You can't replace a political program with just talk about human rights and international law, especially because it has no real role to play in our particular situation.
Okay, I work like daily about international law, human rights law, humanitarian law as well. Just to tell you, when in the UN we use this language, but honestly speaking, it doesn't exist a political well. Human rights, it's great, the principles, etc. But as I said in the beginning, when these colonial countries put this, the principle of these laws, because I know very well all UN mechanisms, and we use it. And by the way, the Palestinian NGOs are among the most talented when it comes to these issues. We know very well how to use it, but unfortunately, since it doesn't exist a political will, since the international community have to defend Israel, since the Americans, they impose their laws, since the EU are a very weak entity, So, unfortunately, I'm optimistic with all these circumstances, but, I'm optimistic, and optimistic with basement, not just like that, because I live in another world. Absolutely not. I'm optimistic with the young generation. I'm optimistic when I saw Sunday, 2 o'clock, people like you coming. When we met very talented students, they went once to Palestine through program, and all of them, we asked them, they want to return back again. Some of them, they found jobs, some others not, they want to do internship. So I think international law, it's good to continue really keeping in mind that, to speak with this international community, we have to use it. But when we address to people like you, they know very well the situation in the ground, so we have another language, which is the real language. So.
The question is, this is a real question, which really is worrying me. You talked about apartheid, of course. I'm very agree with you. Not talk about one state, two state. We just talk about human rights and apartheid. It's not done, and racism is not done, and now even fascism and colonialism is not done. Should be repaired. But the answer, you said, even the Jews will agree with this. I speak louder. Even the Jews has no objections. I think they have an objections. They just call it the Jewish state, and even the UN didn't sanctionize the creation of the Jewish state. So what can we averse against this idiot argument of them? It's the Jewish state, and the UN actually agreed on this, which is very bad.
In fact, during the third committee, which is the highest entity against racism, when it comes to states or regulations, etc., when we bring this issue, they said it's still, they doesn't have, in fact, the translation between the lines, because we have it. I have it in French, I have it in German, I have it even in Arabic, it's translated. So and this is when I said that the international community are complicit in one way or another. This is why I say it here. I say it in the UN as well. Because if there is a political will, they will oppose something. I will give you one example. In each Human Rights Council session, we had great resolutions appear. And you can't imagine how the Israeli diplomats fight against us. In March, we had the resolution last year how to follow the companies' work in the settlements, because according to international law, the colonies are illegal, based on the authority. And, so every company or any entity who built or helped that these colonies continue to remain, it's a violation of international law, if we speak about international law. So we had a resolution to follow all companies, etc. But because who are these companies? They are from Netherlands, France, England, Germany, etc. So the states, they don't want. We have a resolution. We have a great resolutions appealed by the UN, applauded, by some states. But unfortunately, if we can't really apply these resolutions, so what it said, it's like, yeah, we give Palestinians their rights, so now it's not our business. So now it's the political will. And this is what when I said the political will, it's the third state responsibility, either the EU or the UN, They don't want to hear more. Because, as he said, the Security Council, it's in the hand of these 5 really strong countries. So we are in between. This is the problem. It should be something change in the ground, push this international community to take action. This is why we are promoting the issue of one democratic state. And unfortunately, the PA became like subcontractors for occupation. So are they waiting one day? The whole population became against this Palestinian Authority, even the ones who benefit from the Palestinian Authority. You know why? Palestine is very small. There is many, let's say, tribes or families. So you can see one member of the family, he worked with the Palestinian Authority, and the other, he's, let's say, in the resistance movement. So one day it will be a chaos total in the region. So I think we should not wait until the international community, understand this, because they know very well. They know very well their dirty role, in fact, when it comes to this issue.
Hi, my name is Laith, and I'm Palestinian. And just let me add that the idea of one-state solution, from a personal experience, it will find a consensus among Palestinians. That's what I somehow understood, but I don't know if it's the same case in Israel. But my question is, in the case of us having a one-state solution, you're going to have 2 people in one land, which they would have 2 different languages and 2 different cultures. And so what narrative you're going to send the people, a unified narrative that would make them come together rather than having a divided society?
I will answer one part, then Jeff will add to life. I live in Switzerland, and there is 4 languages. And it's a peaceful country, and I think, they call them like neutral because they never participate in wars, but I can tell you as a Swiss, they sell arms to others, Anyway, they develop, etc. Yeah. No, to be honest, So why we are afraid of this diversity, One day we have, as Palestinians and as Jewish Israelis, we have to agree to put an end. Otherwise, you have nothing to keep for your kids and kids for the other kids. And this as well, it will continue fighting until we have hate. Why we are able to talk together outside, when we met in Europe or any other country, and we are unable to talk inside. Why? When we believe about this idea, and when we start to convince people surrounded to us, our family, when we practice this, then this is how we can realize this idea. Otherwise, we will keep it like illusion. And maybe this is one of the reasons why there is many different groups, but never all these groups put themselves together to develop this idea, instead of having really different groups in different European or, different countries. So I keep for Jeff the other part.
No, I think you said enough. Just one thing, to carry the thought on, part of our program, another point, has to do with the wider Middle East. Because you can't, Israel-Palestine isn't in a vacuum. You've got to deal with the wider issue. And here it's very, this gets very visionary. And it's not practical at this stage. But the problem we have in the Middle East, and not just in the Middle East, in the rest of the world really, are states. All these states are artificial. We're still living in not so much a neo-colonial, almost a colonial reality. And the states divide peoples, and the states are autocratic in a lot of places. So in one sense of the future of the Middle East might be to loosen the grip of the states. In some ways, the EU has gone that way of trying to loosen up states a little bit. And almost, I don't want to get into, Marie Le Pen mode, but, the Middle East is really more a collection, a mosaic of peoples and religions and ethnic groups. So if we could think of a Middle East that was based on that mosaic rather than on 5 or 6 or 7 states, and I have a slide, I won't put it up now. If we thought of assemblies, this is what the Kurds in some ways are trying to do in northern Syria. They've taken this idea of popular participation of different communities. But if we could look at, let's say an assembly of peoples in the Middle East as an assembly. There could be an assembly of women. There could be an assembly of young people. There could be an assembly of religions. There could be, an assembly of national groups. There'd be an assembly of free thinkers. That was the one I would belong to. I don't want to be in any of the other assemblies. And in a sense, to give more of an expression to the variety, the mosaic of peoples and voices in the Middle East, that would be much more representative than what we have today. So I think what we have to try to do is build on the diversity that we have. The diversity we have isn't by nature antagonistic. In the Muslim world, people live together for centuries. A lot of this has to do with the influence of the colonial experience. So in a sense, let's say we have to decolonize the whole region, and really, in a way, decolonize the globe in order to get to a better political place.
Sorry, I want to add a word. The EU countries, or if I want to give you a small example, the France and Germany, the war, the occupation, and now there is no war. And there is something in law, because somebody interested in law, it's called transitional justice. And the 3 elements, the first one, recognition that something happened bad in the past. Then compensation, and then of course reparation. Compensation, it doesn't mean just give money. It could be, moral compensation. And reparation, it could be also moral reparation. So I think when this diversity that Jeff mentioned, especially we live in the same land, and we have to put an end to this suffering, And this is when I mentioned Eurovision. Israel considered in Europe, and it's a part of Eurovision, and the other part, which is some meters, they are not considered like in Europe. So how it comes that the European consider Israel as European countries, and it's completely different, and even in the geography, it's very far. It's not the same like the region of Europe. So why the European countries are able to put this entity? Because it's the economical reason, and it's the same. Why the Israeli, the direction, the president of Israel and the others, they fight with us? Why? Why? Because it touches money. It touches your pocket. When it touches your pocket, it's harm you. So this is why, even with these simple millions or few, very small sum of money, they lose it because it doesn't really very well develop. When we are able to stop contracts of millions or millions of dollars of some companies, then I can say now we realize this objective of BDS. When countries start to speak about sanction if Israel continue violation, then I say yes, the BDS objective is realized, but we are still very far. This is why we kept alone and don't really think that these Arab Muslim countries are caring. Today starts the Bahrain conference. It's more than normalization. Saudi Arabia, the sheikhs of the mosque, they visit Israel. Qatar since 10 years and nobody speak about it. So this is why Erbil, the European, the international community want to end the dictatorship in Iraq. Go and see what's happened in Erbil. More Israeli companies than other Arab countries. And Erbil, it's in the northern of Iraq. Where is the petrol? So now it's economy, now it's money. Now people have to understand how we can put our needs, or how to put an end to this suffering together. Because the Israel, they will benefit. The markets will open to them in Arab countries, now in secret. It exists, but in secret. But in the future, it will be openly demanded. This is why we are the one who put the conditions to this, If we don't move, then it will continue. And then you will see my grandchildren will address to your grandchildren after years.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions.